For our first metric of invasive species, both plants and animals, in the guidebook you'll see there is 3 subcodes underneath this metric. 1.1 is referring to the spatial extent. Again, that is a universal metric for all of our activities, including photo monitoring as well. And then there's also 1.2 and 1.3 that focuses on the density and/or percent cover of invasive or native species. And so we're going to focus on those 2 subcodes today. When we look under subcode 1.2 for the density or percent cover of invasive species, you'll see 3 approaches or methods that we'll use to collect this type of information. And for 1.3, we're going to just be doing the collection for native species at the same time as this, if applicable. For approach A, the belt transect, you can look to the image to the right to see this is going to involve laying out a transect line at a specific measurement and placing quadrats along it. Approach B only focuses on quadrats in a specific plot. In the example to the right, you can see a circle plot area designated and quadrats randomly thrown across it. Approach C focuses on absolute tally counts. So this is when you go into an area and count every single invasive that you see, usually down to the species. This is usually going to only occur on very small sites or with partners that have very rigorous monitoring procedures. We're now going to walk through approach A of conducting a belt transect for invasive and native species. If you're interested in figuring out how to do approach B of using quadrats only, there's a segment of the Metric 2 Forest video that talks about that, so go ahead and go to that one after this if you're looking for that method. Let's go ahead and add a visual to make this feel like a real project. So here's a mock map of a project area where, say, you're doing invasive species removal within that boundary. This is roughly a 20-acre activity area, and for 20 acres, we're going to do 5 plots or 5 transects, since we're doing approach A of the belt transect. You'll see I already put those 5 plots on here within the boundary area, and the reason I did this before we get out into the field is we always want to do it beforehand so we don't have any of that bias when we're seeing the visual of the invasives around us out there or trying to pick a spot that's close to the road so we don't have to trek through the woods. And so there's a whole video on ensuring random sample locations you can watch in this training as well, so you can go ahead and look at that. That'll really help you to plant the sample locations before you get out there. You'll be reminded to complete this step of pre-planning plots to ensure random placement when you fill out the handy-dandy pre-restoration worksheet. And of course, before we go out into the field, we can also use this as a tool to remember what materials we need to bring out there. So we look under the what equipment will be needed for this baseline monitoring. You can see all of the items listed. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we do our universal metrics while we're out there. So that's going to mean we're going to need everything for photo points and of course our GPS to take the waypoints and eventually the spatial extent. And there's a couple more things we're going to need specifically for this ecological sampling, which is a quadrat and long measuring tape. The sheet also asks if there's any data sheets that you need for this activity monitoring. And for invasive species, yes, there is a data sheet, and it looks like this. As we walk through doing the belt transect approach, I'll make sure to reference when you need to fill out the specific sections of this data sheet. When we got all of our materials ready, we can hop in the trucks, go to the site, and head out to our first monitoring plot. Doesn't matter how you number these, you can just go to whichever one is closest to where you park at, and then make sure you get to the other ones later on. Once we get to that first plot, we're going to want to pull out that data sheet and start taking notes, filling in the basic information up above of the conditions around you, the time, the date, and what crew you're serving on, and the project location. The site type is always going to be restoration, unless you're doing a Sentinel activity. You could potentially have a control. You're going to want to put in site notes, pre or post, referring to baseline or after work was done. So this is an example of baseline, so we'll put pre. That size of activity area, because we haven't done the work, we don't know exactly how much we're going to get done, but we should have a projected area that we're going to accomplish, just a boundary that we've been provided by the partner. And then we're also going to want to put the size of the quadrat used, because that may differ from team to team. The total length of the transect and number of quadrats on the transect should already be predetermined before you get out in the field. And then the starting latitude and longitude, you'll drop a point with your GPS to get that information. Go ahead and put it on here. And then we're also going to have this starting location serve as our first photo point. For all my visual learners, here's an example of what this would look like on the diagram. So we've got our first plot, our start of the transect, where the camera notifies that we're taking a photo point here. This is going to be our photo point station. We're dropping a waypoint, that's why the GPS is shown here. We're going to take the photo point in the 4 cardinal directions, and then the green line is where we're going to walk out the 100 meters of the transect. When we're at the opposite end of that transect, we're going to want to take a waypoint again so we can get that latitude and longitude. And we're going to go ahead and collect that now, so then we can just work our way backwards when we're doing the quadrats. So you'll see on this map that we're going to have a waypoint both at the beginning and the ending of the transect, and then we're going to scatter those quadrats back as we work our way up back to that photo point. And so if we have a 100-meter track or transect and we are doing 5 quadrats, we can just do 100 divided by 5 and place a quadrat at every 20 meters. But again, this doesn't need to be exact for the quadrat placement because we are still wanting to be random with our location. And at each of those quadrats, we're going to be filling out our data sheet. So you'll see here on the bottom section of the data sheet under quadrats, we'll list 1 through 5 under this first transect. So in transect 1, we estimated 30% tallow and 10% privet, and so on down the line. There's also a note section in here, and it notes that you can put any invasive species in the general area, not just within the quadrat, and also any native species present. So in this note, we're just going to say there's invasive tallow is present along most of the transect, especially in areas of puddling. And native species of holly is competing for canopy light with large tallow and camphor, and large long-leaf pines are prevalent as well. So you'll see that those notes are pretty specific, and that just really helps paint the picture for people looking at this data later on. For post-monitoring, so the monitoring that you do after you've completed the restoration work, you're basically going to follow that same procedure. Of course, things and conditions are going to change from day to day. So it's not going to look exactly the same, and we don't expect it to be. The main thing you need to know is that the photo point must be in the same place so we can get that systematic range of view. But the transect and quadrat placement can and most likely will vary each collection. In this example, you can see on the left, that was our pre-restoration transect and quadrats. Obviously, in the field, you're not going to be able to do a straight line like that. It's going to look a lot more like this post picture I put up here of you're kind of walking around, dodging some trees, and those quadrats aren't falling exactly in the same place, but we're going in the same general direction, and we're hopefully kind of hitting similar areas as to the first time around. Post-restoration worksheet or data sheet is going to look pretty similar to that pre-restoration one. The only difference is we're going to know that size of our activity area now that we've done our spatial extent for the entire activity area worked. The first latitude and longitude, the starting one, should stay the same because that's where our photo point is, but the ending latitude and longitude will most likely change. Also, the information under the quadrats should change. You can see here that it's gone down quite a bit from before. This is what we want to see, but we also don't want our folks to lie when they're collecting the information. If there were some species missed, we want to take track of that. And also in the notes section, again, really outline what we're seeing. You can see that there's a few saplings coming up, so there's going to be a note to have some future treatment. And also, what we wanted to accomplish is happening. We're seeing the canopy open up for those native species, and there's some flowers that we didn't know were there before.